Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our session today. So my name's Adam Parnell. I'm the Business Development Director for Europe and Americas here at Liminal. And today's session is titled The UK, a global hub for crypto assets and fintech innovation. And we have a great panel to discuss on this topic today. So I'm going to introduce the panel one by one and bring them into the discussion, and then we can start the questions. So the first person I want to introduce is Brian Whitehurst. Brian is the head of regulatory affairs at Luca, and I believe Brian's coming in from New York. Is that right, Brian?
That's correct. Pleasure to be here. Look forward to today's discussion.
Awesome. And our next speaker is Kunal Karanai, head of business at Scallop. And Kunal's coming in from India. Is that right?
100%. A pleasure to be here, man.
Awesome. And after Kunal, we also have Joanna. Joanna's the NED at Crypto UK. And I know Joanna's coming from a lovely, glorious location there with a nice kind of foresty, jungly background.
Exactly, like my character. Good to be here, everyone. I'm actually normally based in Brussels and in between Brussels and London, but for this webinar, I am representing the Romanian mountains and talking about crypto. I don't think there's anyone in a, I don't know, 100-kilometer area or even more that is familiar with the topic. So there you go.
Wow. And that's modern technology for you coming in from
Yeah.
such a location as well. And also we have Manuel Fayado, digital assets practice lead from Plenitude Consulting. And I know, Manuel, you're normally based in Paris. We had the pleasure to meet there last week, but you're in London right now. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Exactly. Split time between Paris and London. So happy to be here.
What a wonderful way to split your time. And then lastly, we have Anna Tiwari. And Anna works with me here at Liminal. And Anna is AVP of Legal and Compliance here at Liminal. And I believe, Anna, you're also coming in from India.
Yes, thank you for the intro, Adam, and pleasure to be speaking with all such stalwarts in the industry.
Awesome. So again, thank you to our speakers for joining us today. Just to reiterate, so the topic today is all around the UK and the UK being a global hub for crypto assets and fintech innovation. So I'm sure the UK's approach to regulation is going to play a big theme in the discussions that we're going to have today. So I have a whole bunch of questions for our panel. So I'm going to direct the questions over to our panel. And if anybody else in the panel wants to weigh in, please do weigh in. Don't just feel restricted to where I direct the questions. And I know also for everybody in the audience out there, if you have questions, please do, throw them at us, and I'll try our best to get them to our panel. And if we don't answer them in the session today, we can always get our answers back to you after the session. So our first question I would like to direct towards Joanna. And our first question here is all around the APPG report. And as per the APPG report, the UK does not want to be left behind in regulating crypto. So what I would like to ask is, what do you think are the benefits for the UK becoming a global leader in the cryptocurrency and digital assets industry?
Thank you, Adam. And before I start, let me introduce myself a little bit, just briefly. It's correct. I am Ned. I'm on the board of Crypto UK as a non-executive director. My background is in politics and finance. I was in the European Parliament for the better part of 10 years and then switched over to Citigroup in 2017, where I started leading on crypto. It was pretty early on, and then fully moved on into crypto and DeFi. Have had a variety of C-level roles in all sorts of DeFi protocols and Web3 entities, and I'm currently advising over 8 projects across the spectrum in Web3, starting with Web3 gaming through to digital fashion and next generational DeFi. I'm currently in the process of co-founding a women-led Web3 marketplace and sit on the board of Crypto UK, as already mentioned. It's a great question, Adam, but I cannot help to wonder if this would have been a question less than 2 years ago when all the all the jurisdictions were engaged in this underground fight to gain supremacy in terms of being the pro crypto jurisdiction as a result of we can call them inflated Web3 and metaverse and crypto predictions that we had back in the day, and also the flocking of masses towards a newly identified concept of direct ownership of the internet. But the same answer I would have given then, I'm giving it today. I think the benefits of the UK being a global leader in crypto. So the answer to that question is self-evident. Crypto represents the financial services arena for a new form of internet, a smart contracts based internet where the user can integrate his or her social graph, communications, value creation, assets, basically lifestyle directly into the technology. And porting all those attributes across a variety of infrastructure, thus generating and revolutionizing everything about ownership, value creation, and finance. So by default, who wins the race of becoming a leader in promoting this era of internet and technological and financial revolution has nothing but to gain from this. Um, I think we can narrow it down to two things. So we can now, if you look at, I mean, crypto is a natively financial innovation, but also technological innovation. So the evolution of our industry is subject to parameters from both financial cycles and evolutions and technological cycles and product cycles and evolution. And if we boil it down in terms of what does it mean, what generates evolution in this phase of the evolution, I keep on repeating myself, of our industry, it comes down to capital and regulation. Now, we have seen, I'm sure all the panelists have seen this, and most likely everyone in the audience, there has been a despite the bear market, there has been a massive investment into infrastructure in crypto, over, if I'm not mistaken, 216 million for the past year. And now we're progressing. So from that accelerated infrastructure investment trend, we're progressing towards a more user friendly and application layer in the evolution of our industry. And that is required to onboard masses. And in order to reach that level, we also have to have particular regulatory outcomes to support that. And not only support that, but also allow entities within our industry to engage with the right business partners and the most relevant capital allocators that will allow our industry to grow. As referenced earlier, we need capital and regulation in this phase. I think the UK is perfectly positioned for both. If we think of regulation, what we have seen recently from the UK government is definitely a pro-crypto stance. Obviously, we have had the FSMA, so the Financial Services and Market Act that received royal assent. It recognizes crypto trading as a regulated financial services activity, and it moves beyond that towards enabling more experimentation via sandboxes, etc. What we expect to see with this regulation in place is more openness towards compliant crypto firms operating out of the UK, in the sense that compliant crypto firms operating out of the UK should benefit from a very swift licensing regime granted by the FCA, and also have access to all the professional services that are needed to operate a business. And what do I mean by that? Mainly the banking infrastructure, because we all know what has been happening recently with entities being precluded from accessing vital banking services. So the pro-regulation, pro-crypto stance is already there. It's not comprehensive yet, but I think we're seeing the correct trend. In terms of capital and in terms of that symbiosis between technology and financial innovation, which is what crypto represents, let's not forget, London is the largest hub for for the financial sector industry and also for the tech industry. And so we have all of the entities that are required to infuse capital in crypto, DeFi, Web3. We have them in the UK. So with all of these being said, UK is not only poised, doesn't only make complete sense for the UK to become a global leader in the space. At this phase of the evolution in the industry, all of the elements are aligned for the UK to do so. And to that, I would add the fact that crypto represents huge political capital that has been underutilized. We need a new class of politicians. We need politicians that think about the new generation and this new era of the internet that is representative of the new generation. I haven't seen anyone capitalize on that. So maybe there's a political angle that can be brought into this equation. But I, for one, am sold, which is why I advise many projects operating out of the UK, because I do believe that with the right political capital, with the right financial capital, and with the right mindset coming from the regulatory sphere, the UK can play one of the, if not the most important role in the global crypto industry.
Wow, that was a really strong answer.
Thank you.
and really positive as well, which obviously being a native in the UK is nice to hear. Hey, do anybody else on the panel want to weigh in on this particular question before we move on to the next one? I think Joanna pretty much hit the nail on the head there, but any other comments from the rest of the panel? No, I think Joanna, you nailed it.
I'm sure I did. Thank you.
Okay, cool. In that case, let's move swiftly on to my next question then. And my next question I would love to pose towards Kunal, if that's okay. And the question is, how can the UK government regulate the cryptocurrency and digital asset sector in a way that protects consumers and investors while also allowing the sector to grow and innovate?
So, thanks, Adam, for that question. I'd obviously first like to echo what Loana said, that I believe in a very pro crypto side from the UK government as well, and personally as well. And I think we all know that crypto is becoming more and more popular among consumers and investors. And I think the markets are indicating, we all know the markets are indicating that it's here to stay. But overall, I think the blockchain and crypto sector offers a lot of opportunities, and the UK is in a great position to capitalize on them. Again, I'm echoing a lot of what Loana said over here, but tapping into these opportunities will require a lot of strategic planning, in my opinion. And regulating the crypto in the UK is going to be a complex task, which I believe would be a delicate balance between consumer protection and, while we're protecting the consumer, to foster innovation, right? And I think while these points have been discussed globally, Loana touched on some of these points as well. But a few basic points is obviously the right licensing and registration of companies. So implementing a licensing and registration system for exchanges, asset service providers, blockchain companies, which would ensure us that legitimate and compliant businesses operate in the sector, which would obviously lead to strong KYC, AML, PAP compliance checks for these companies and their consumers, which would obviously help us against AML, terrorist financing, other aspects that bring negative name to the crypto space. One thing I feel that a lot of people are still not talking about in the space right now, especially from a government and regulatory perspective, at least where what I've heard so far, there's not really any security standards for the for crypto exchanges, wallet providers, or guys who are working in the space or creating products. These basic, if there's a minimum set of security standards that the government implements, including cybersecurity, right? Because this would actually help follow for best practices, so users' data and funds are safeguarded one way or the other. I don't really see this so far. I might be mistaken, but then moving on again, Loana touched on this. Unfortunately, Loana's kind of taken a lot of my points out here. But another point which I really like to talk about is the regulatory sandbox, right? With all the 4 points I just mentioned, having a regulatory sandbox would actually allow for experimentation where consumer protections measures are in place, right? So what that would do is actually let companies create products, make sure it passes regulatory checks, and launch them, so we know what's coming, and there's various different checks that can avoid scams, hacks, etc. Right? Uh, and I think the UK government is really, really moving towards some of these things already. But again, there's two other points where I always hop upon when it comes to the crypto side and governments, which is legal clarity and consumer education. Consumers still globally don't, except in countries where there's already some regulations put out there, don't actually have uh, clear legal definitions of what crypto is. For example, in India, it's still in the gray area. There's no black or white. So because of that, consumers get confused, and I think it's similar in a lot of other jurisdictions, including the UK. So that legal clarity, along with more education, explaining to users is crypto is good, bad, etc. More than that, also to educate the consumers of why different kind of scams happen. So preventing by providing education, I think we can prevent the retail users from actually falling victim to various different scams. To be on over here, and I think overall, while these points are there, but there have been some countries out there who have successfully tried to implement some regulations, etc. The UK should be working with various different regulatory bodies, working with them, working with other stakeholders in order to strike the right balance between regulation and innovation in the space. Is what I believe, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just touching back on what you were saying about security certifications and things that are out there. I don't think there are a huge amount in the space, but at Liminal, we're big advocates for the CCSS certifications, which I know you're familiar with. I think CCSS stands for is it cryptocurrency security standards, and they're various levels. But yeah, for anybody out there who hasn't heard of them, take a look, because they are a really well set group of standards in that particular category. I think it's organization called C4 that issue them. Does anybody else on the panel have anything they want to weigh in and add on this topic?
I think on the topic of security, it's very interesting that you mention it, because it's definitely on the horizon, and I think that it's something that we'll touch upon a bit later. But we have had a few some consultations or some opening discussion documents by some regulators about DeFi, for example. In the past couple of months, we had one in France, we had one in the US, etc. And they have been hit it right in the nail, in the sense of saying, look, DeFi, one of the risks that's inherent to DeFi, and it is very specific, is the reliance on code. And of course, that means that you have to get to a point where you can trust the code and trust that it's going to work as expected, etc. So so there's kind of that move towards saying, we need to figure out this standards part when it comes to DeFi, and also even when it comes to decentralized parties. That's also something that we'll be touching upon later. But you have the licensing regimes that are coming in Hong Kong, in France, in Dubai, and those also add cybersecurity to the mix. So it's definitely on the horizon. It's very early days, because those regimes are new, or we're still in the consultation phase, but it's definitely happening.
And Manuel, like you said, right, these are happening outside. I think it should also be happening inside of the UK, while various different policies are getting made. That was the point. What I was like, in that sense, that other regimes are doing it, we should learn from them. Is what I think.
Yeah.
Cool.
Shine,
Okay.
sorry, just wanted to add on the security side just a little bit. I'm not going to speak long, promise. I think it's also important to acknowledge that there's this trend from DeFi in particular around industry generated standards. So if we come up with some prerequisites that various entities could comply with in certain terms of audits and increased security, etc., but that are industry generated and almost create peer pressure for those entities to comply with them, I think it's something that we need to consider. And like I said, I've seen this trend be accentuated. And also, I forgot to mention that I mentor a variety of startups in the Outlier Ventures, across the cohorts of the Outlier Ventures Basecamp. And in the last cohort, the Aptos Network cohort, I've seen many projects that specialize on security for Web3 in particular, and some of them use AI tools to increase performance. So the future is not as bleak. This is definitely one of the biggest problems that we have in the industry, and it ties into that consumer protection angle. And I agree with everything that you said, Kunal, and also you, Manuel. But let's focus our attention on the projects that are actually working very hard to deliver solutions to this problem and invest in them.
Interesting. Yeah, it'll be exciting to see these projects, and when they start to come to fruition, that would be really cool. So next question, because we need to get kind of back on track. We're falling behind a little bit. So this one is directed towards Anna, and the question is: as one of the recommendations in the APPG report, the UK government wants to explore options of improving financial inclusion for people into mainstream finance. So how do crypto assets play a role, and how will it help?
Great question there, Adam. So I would want to take a step back from the discussion and want to explain what does financial inclusion means, because financial inclusion means ensuring that everyone, especially those who are underserved or marginalized, have access to various financial services, products, and resources. So the goal is to provide people with the resources and chance to fully engage in the economy, handle their finances, and enhance their overall welfare. So there's a recent report by the World Bank which says that an estimated of around 1.4 billion people in the world are unbanked. They don't have banking services. So traditional banking systems often pose these challenges, and these are the barriers for unbanked and underbanked populations, preventing them from having access to necessary financial services and resources. Now, coming back to how crypto assets will play a role and how they are playing a role. Firstly, is access. So, digital currencies and crypto wallets can provide a cost effective and accessible solution, allowing individuals to store, send, and receive funds, which is the simplest of answer of these services. Second is remittances and cross border transactions. See, a lot of migrant workforce often face these high fees and long processing times. So even when I was reading the report, there was an example that when the war happened, the Russia-Ukraine war, and the banks were closed, there were no ATMs around. Uh, People pooled in money through crypto. People supported Ukrainian population through crypto assets, and people were accepting crypto assets for all kinds of services. So remittances across globe, if there is a cross-border transaction of that capacity can happen, I think nothing beats it. That is what the entire solution we have been building on. Third point I would come to is microtransactions and micro lending. So crypto assets enable microtransactions, allowing individuals to make any fractional microtransactions, and even it helps entrepreneurs in micro lending for their projects. So definitely, from an ICO to an STO perspective, it gives masses uh, an individual choice to participate in their own building of wealth. Right now, taking points from Joanna and Kunal's discussion, the basic crux for all of this and the discussion we are happening that taking place is because of financial education and literacy. If there is no financial education and literacy behind all of this, then there is no point. So implementing an education program can help individuals understand the benefits and risks associated with digital assets. So by promoting financial literacy, people can make informed decisions about using cryptocurrencies as part of their strategies. So I remember from an example in Argentina where inflation rates have been historically high. Interest in cryptocurrencies surged to protect against the devaluation of the national currency, which is again an extreme example of education, that how people have learned through their adversities. And lastly, one more point I want to include is savings and investments. So for individuals who lack access to traditional investment options, crypto assets can provide an avenue for accumulating wealth and participation in the global financial markets. So another example here in Venezuela, due to hyperinflation, which eroded the value of the national currency, pushing many citizens to explore cryptocurrencies as a store of value. Some Venezuelans have turned to Bitcoin and other digital assets to protect their savings from devaluation. So, collaborative efforts from government, businesses, and communities are necessary to harness the are required and necessary to harness the potential of crypto assets while we address the challenges and risks. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Anna. So I'm going to try and speed up through these questions because we have quite a few, and I appreciate your very, very busy people, so I don't want to keep you here all afternoon. But the next question I have goes to Manuel, and this one's a mouthful, so bear with me. Manuel, so APPG recommended that the government should consider whether existing regulations and frameworks are appropriate or could be amended, and if not, should consider new domain-specific regulation. So what are your thoughts on what can be amended and what regulations can be brought in the UK?
Thank you, Adam. So, I mean, I think that, yes, that question is pretty much the question that has been playing at regulators all over the world. It's basically a question of how do we regulate, this new asset class. And I think that, what the APPG is saying is very sensible in the sense that, it recognizes on one hand that, that some risks are similar to those of traditional financial activities. Some activities are similar. And in that sense, you already have a set of regulations that are there to prevent financial crime, ensure consumer protection, and all of these things. And it doesn't necessarily make sense to reinvent the wheel, and that's, what we have been seeing in a lot of countries. You see kind of a transposition of existing rules, especially when it comes to financial crime, for example. So, that's kind of what we call, the same risks, same rules approach. And you see a lot of regulators taking that approach. However, that approach has limitations. And I think that that's another thing where, the report is very sensible in the sense of saying there may be some cases where the activities may look the same, but there's differences. There's different risks. There's projects that decentralize progressively, for example. There's reliance on code. There's different market structures with different players. And in those cases, you need to adapt some of the rules. And then how do you do it? I think that one thing that the UK has done well, at least, by the way that they have presented things in the Treasury consultation on the future regulatory framework, is to shift the conversation a little bit from same risks, same rules, to same risks, same regulatory outcomes. And that is also what you find in the IOSCO and the FSB proposals for global regulation of crypto. It's basically the idea of saying, we need to get to a place that gives us similar protections to the ones that we have in traditional financial services activities, but these may require different rules that accommodate these new risks, these new players, and these new products. So, I mean, I hinted to some of those examples, but some of the areas where we see that is, for example, disclosures. Who is responsible for disclosures to investors? Are those the issuers of the tokens, of the assets, or the exchanges where they trade? How do you handle the fact that the issuers decentralize progressively over time and you eventually don't have a centralized issue? What do you do? Where do you put the responsibilities? Best execution. How do you ensure best execution where the ordering of the transactions depends on the validators? How do you ensure market abuse as a trading venue where you only see a very small part of the trading because it happens over hundreds of venues around the world? Looking ahead with DeFi, how do you ensure, ML and KYC checks without turning DeFi into something that is not DeFi anymore? So I think that, those are examples of some of the questions that we raise and some of the points that we have raised when answering those consultations with Crypto UK and other industry bodies. And I think that, if we move the conversation to the area of, okay, what is the outcome that we want to achieve? That is a good guiding principle because, it means that we can keep an open mind about how the rules will look like. They may involve different players, they may involve different responsibilities, but we can all agree on the outcomes of preventing financial crime, protecting consumers, ensuring market stability. And in that sense, if we manage to have the conversation in those terms, I think we can get to regulations that are proportionate and that serve the objectives that we can all agree on.
Manuel, I love it. I love it. Outcomes focused. That definitely sits well with me.
Exactly.
So Brian, I've left you quiet in the background for too long. So the next one is for you. Brian, UK cryptocurrency and digital asset firms are struggling to secure access to UK banking services which could fundamentally undermine the government's ambition for the UK to become a cryptocurrency and digital asset hub. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Adam. And I will try to be quick, considering time at this point. But I appreciate everyone's answers up until to me. So I think it is a problematic issue for UK-based companies. And I think if it were to continue, it is definitely going to undermine the government's crypto ambitions. There's a lot of responsible companies that have been doing business in the UK and globally for years now and have had banking services with no issues. But now we're hearing from their banks that their accounts are going to be closed. Unfortunately, this is not exclusive to the UK. It's happening globally, happening quite a bit here in the US. And it's happening as banks are trying to mitigate the risks of, the market shaking events of 2022 in the industry, coupled with, I think, a global lack of regulatory clarity coming, especially out of the US. And then just general macroeconomic factors that are giving banks pause on how they want to evaluate and deal with crypto companies. Now, that being said, I think there obviously globally countries are taking a new approach to frameworks and regulatory guidance, and they're wanting to be the focal points of Web3 and crypto going forward. UK being one of those countries, and I think if they want to be part of the next big crypto boom, they're building out the regulatory frameworks to help mitigate the risks that historically are associated with the ecosystem, which will ultimately give banks more comfort when providing banking services. I mean, then you also look at like somewhere like Hong Kong, where the HKMA is actually putting pressure on banks like HSBC, Bank of China, Standard Chartered to not shy away from licensed crypto platforms, because Hong Kong does in fact want to be part of this next big like boom and part of the focal point of Web3 going forward. For the UK, as I said, like we all know, it wants to be one of the big hubs going forward. So it's about, I think, developing logical and sound regulatory frameworks. And I think the issue of banking has been raised within Parliament and the government, and I don't think they're going to go as far as that the HKMA went as saying that they put pressure on the banks, but they're going to champion the aspects of banking, making sure that companies have banking services in the UK. But I think ultimately banks are going to have to get comfortable with crypto. But with that, I think going back to Anna's point earlier, is there are a lot of services coming out and a lot of infrastructure being built that address the very things that banks have issues with. These are risky products still, but there's also risky products in traditional finance, and that banks are willing to deal with and provide services for. So if we are able to get the infrastructures in place, and I think then things that deal with like, manipulation, attribution, and most importantly for me and Luca is data. With a proper understanding of how everything works in the crypto ecosystem, and I think especially transactional level data from companies, that banks will be able to better understand the market and identify good market participants and be able to mitigate the risks and provide services to the solid companies.
Awesome. Thank you for those insights, Brian. Really interesting. So my next question is another one for Joanna. So Joanna, how can the UK government work with international regulators to develop a coordinated approach for better cryptocurrency regulation?
Adam, I'm not known to follow the rules. So before I answer that question, I want to add something to Brian's response. I second everything that you said. I just wanted to point to the fact, I mean, I don't know, it's a strictly a UK thing, but I think it has gone beyond the UK borders. The whole Nigel Farage incident and various banking relations. When the unbanking of crypto entities started to happen en masse, the reaction from HMT was that this is a commercial banking issue and they're not going to get involved. We look at what's happening with Nigel Farage, and they definitely have gotten involved. Now, we can argue that There are slightly different elements into both of these cases. However, there's a lot of common ground. So maybe someone should analyze the discrepancy in terms of how authorities react to one case versus the other. And yes, we do still have a huge reputation issue in crypto. But I think supervisors and regulators are equipped to differentiate between various entities that operate in the space and act correctly. Now, moving away from that and answering your question, look, we like it or not, regulation is the theme of the day, and it's going to continue to be so for a very long time next year and probably after that, in lockstep with the evolution of the industry. In terms of what the UK can do to interact with global regulators, as mentioned by all of the panelists, and as it's a known fact that crypto is a global industry, and many of the elements that are accentuated in terms of the benefits of crypto are global in nature: cross-border payments, access for the unbanked, so financial inclusion, improvements of global financial markets infrastructure, etc. So it's a sine qua non fact that any jurisdiction being serious about becoming a leader in crypto regulation needs to also operate at a consistent global coordinated level. And so with that, the UK obviously needs to get involved and also influence the discussion at the international standard setting body level, right? We've mentioned IOSCO, FSB, FATF, etc. So the UK needs to play an important part there. But I, for one, despite of the global nature of crypto, I still believe that there's a competitive advantage for a jurisdiction that enables a very progressive regulatory regime for crypto. We've seen the EU with MiCA. Obviously, the EU is playing the already known card of becoming the global regulation exporter. They've seen it play out perfectly well with GDPR. They're now extending this to MiCA. They're now looking at potentially regulating DeFi. I hope they don't, at least not at this stage. And if they do, I really hope they involve the industry, because if not, they're going to fail in that exercise. So yes, it is a competitive advantage that, if played well, can put the UK on the map in a different manner. The UK is never going to be the regulator exporter the EU is, that's for sure. So I believe that government should play a very different game in terms of allowing progressive regulation, in terms of attracting investments as a result of this progressive type of regulatory regime, and also in terms of collaboration, because that was the question. There are many progressive jurisdictions showing their faces by the day. Just recently, just yesterday, I think the Japanese Prime Minister reference Web3 as the underlying, the layer underlying a new form of capitalism, and supporting, and with that announced his intention to support Web3 development in Japan, even beyond what already exists, which is regulatory clarity. So the UK should probably focus on cooperation and partnerships with those entities that have shown themselves to be clear and progressive when it comes to crypto. And yes, for now, entities will migrate towards the jurisdictions where there's clear regulation. And this is definitely the EU. But beyond that, I think they will choose, as the industry matures, they will choose jurisdictions that are more progressive. So progressive stance over clarity will trump, I guess, in the next couple of years. And the UK is best fit to engage in partnerships with those jurisdictions that have shown a progressive stance towards crypto. I think this is the way forward, and of course, minimal standards at global level that it can influence as a country present in all of the aforementioned international industry setting bodies.
Awesome. As always, Joanna, amazing insights. Thank you for that. And I think the last question regarding banking must have been a hot topic right now, because we had a question from the audience, or comment/question. I don't think we have time to address it right now, but you guys can see it on the screen here. So just to add on that point while I move us on to the next question. So the next question I want to direct back towards Brian. Brian, from a standpoint that businesses are keen on the UK as a possible jurisdiction, what are the current regulatory requirements for different businesses that offer crypto asset services in the UK?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's the easy answer is it's registering with the FCA under AML and safety regimes. The issue with that kind of is it's difficult to actually get that process, that license, and receive it. I think there was a study at the beginning of the year that showed only 15% of businesses are actually trying to get that license were from crypto companies were actually receiving it. Much like here in New York with the BIT license, where very, very few people are actually or companies are actually able to obtain that license. Then moving forward in the short term, obviously the FCA is rolling out very new strict regulations around advertising of crypto products and tokens. They're taking away things like refer your friend bonuses. Risk warnings are going to be required to be clear and not misleading in advertisements. Now, I think going forward, this could all change. Obviously, with the Financial Services and Markets Bill passes, there's going to be new regulations with that. Obviously, as been mentioned numerous times, Asian Treasury is put out their consultation report, and they're taking a more drilled down evaluation of the entire ecosystem with the goal of creating what, for me, which I greatly appreciate, a tiered approach to regulation. I don't necessarily love the omnibus type bills that are being passed to try and cover everything at once. I think you're going to miss a lot of holes. So I think the UK taking a more pure approach is sensible, and trying to learn from what's working and what isn't, and being able to engage the industry on a more consistent basis as they develop more regulations. So starting with stablecoins and custody, then exchanges, mining, staking, lending, working through each of these problems individually rather than tackling one is, I think, a positive development. And then I think one thing to note that I think important for UK is that they're not looking at the individual assets, that they're looking at the activity involved with those assets. I think one of the things you see, like in the US, that has caused so much friction is you're having a constant battle between the SEC and the CFTC about what is security, what is a commodity. And it's slowed down the process because they're more concerned about their jurisdictional reach than they are actually like solving any issues that the ecosystem needs. Now, the Ripple decision that came out last week kind of went against that and said, we're not going to look at the individual asset, we're looking at the activity surrounding it and determining whether that is a security or not. But the XRP itself is not a security. So I think going back to the UK really has the opportunity to be a leader here when it goes to regulating the activity and providing sound regulations for the industry and clear guidance on what needs to be registered, what doesn't, how companies need to move forward to thrive.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Really interesting to hear the comparison from your perspective in the US to the UK as well. I think it's a really interesting relationship, as always, between the US and the UK. So I appreciate we're running over on time, but we still have a couple of questions yet to get through. So I'm just going to try and power through, and hopefully we'll make it to the end before anybody needs to jump out. But if any of our panelists do need to go, please just shout at me, say, Adam, stop asking questions, and we'll wrap things up. So the next one goes to Manuel. Manuel, how do you think these and other regulatory requirements that are on the horizon compare with what's out there in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I didn't mention my background. I mean, I have a background in traditional financial services, in the traditional asset management industry. And my experience was a lot, in setting up global compliance frameworks for large, transnational groups. And, and I think that one lesson of that is that, what we have in common is always much stronger than what we have in differences between one jurisdiction and the other. And I think that crypto is not going to be an exception to that, in the sense that, the direction of travel, as we can see, in the regimes that are already in place, like Dubai, Hong Kong, the France licensing regime, MiCA, as we can see also in the IOSCO consultations, in the FSB consultations, we're seeing, the principles to which we're going. We're going to, governance requirements, conflicts of interest, market abuse, all of these basic compliance principles. So the direction of travel is very clear, and I think that in the end we're going to see very different differences. However, that alignment is going to be when we get there. But since crypto is new and countries are moving at different speeds, today, if you take the picture as of July 26, 2023, you do see a lot of differences. So as Brian said, if you're in the UK, your focus today is complying with the MLRs, is to put in place a sound framework for AML, KYC, and sanctions, for example. You're also focusing on travel rule implementation because it comes into force in September. You're focusing on the financial promotions regime that comes into force in October, And you have kind of the luxury of a phased-in approach because the other topics are not kicking in yet because, we're still in the consultation phase. However, if you move outside of the UK, if you're in Hong Kong, or if you're in France, or if you're in Dubai, you are already complying or extending your compliance program to cover all of those things. You're already putting in place conflicts of interest policies. You're already figuring out market abuse. You're already, complying with prudential requirements, etc. You're getting kind of the full enchilada of compliance, And I think that, this is useful for UK entities because it's kind of a glimpse into the future, basically, All of that is coming here. It may come with slight differences in timing. The UK has been trying, for example, to cover staking and lending before MiCA does, for example. You may have differences at the margin in how you treat algorithmic stablecoins, things like that. But in the end, we're going to get to places that are similar. So what will give one country an edge to the other? As Joanna was saying, being progressive, being understanding of the specifics on the industry, having regulators that understand it, that are open to dialogue, that are open-minded about how we comply with the principles and the outcomes that we want to achieve. That's where the edge will lie. But I don't think that we will have a lot of room for arbitrage when it comes to the requirements. It's more like, about the quality of the relationship that we have with the regulators, about the quality of the ecosystem, and the clarity of the rules that we get at.
Interesting, very interesting. That, I mean, I could ask a half a dozen questions on that topic alone, just based on what Manuel said there. But onwards to the next question. So the next one is for Kunal, and Kunal, I know as Scallop is a regulated blockchain, what are the benefits that you see in the long run for the industry to walk the same path that Scallop has walked in becoming regulated?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So a quick background on Scallop, right? We started our company when when our founders conceptualized the company. Before even building a product, we actually went out and obtained regulatory licenses in various different jurisdictions, and now we actually have licenses in 7 different global jurisdictions, including Canada, Dubai, Estonia, a few other places as well. And we strongly believe that being regulated helps us serve our customers better by ensuring that their capital is safeguarded. In fact, like you said, we've actually created a regulated blockchain we're hoping to set the standards for others to follow, while also actually trying to protect our customer funds by having insurance in our custody, etc. Right? In fact, I think our commitment to regulation is really reflected with our Scallop chain again because of the AML, PEP, sanctions, checks, etc. that we have included. And obviously, all of this combined, if other companies are to follow and create more regulated environments so the customers' trust is there, there's a lot more benefits. But I think there's 3 major points. If we have more regulations inside products, such as a Scallop chain, etc., out there, I think one thing is there's going to be a lot more retail investor protection. So with more regulatory oversight, we can actually minimize fraudulent activities and scams, which I think makes this space safer for retail investors. And as we all know, once more and more retail investors come in, this space, everything starts growing and becomes larger. And after a certain point, even governments can't really, they will have to pass regulations quicker, right? Second, what I also see is more of institutional adoption. Whether the framework, the more regulatory, there's larger firms, as we're already seeing globally, right? Like your BlackRock, your Fidelities, all these guys coming in. Although, yes, there might not be clarity, but the more clarity there is, the larger the institutions, the more financial institutions are going to come into the market. We're already seeing this all over Europe, in Asia, where other banks, etc., are getting into ETFs as well. And I think the third and the most important aspect that brings from a regulation is, while retail investors are scared of entering the Web3 crypto space because of certain uncertainties, etc., I think one of the main factors that we all face in our companies is also attraction of talent, right? A lot of Web2 guys do not want to move to Web3 because they see a lot of Web3 companies shutting down. There's some are rug pulls, some are scams. They don't have run rates. There's a lot of different aspects for talent, and I think talent is also the key factor for us as industry to grow global and become where the internet is right now from where it was back in your 2000s and early 90s, right? So yeah, I think regulation is very important as overall growth because it'll add these multiple different factors.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more on that front. And my last question, we made it all the way to the end, goes to Anna. And I know, Anna, here at Liminal, we embrace regulation. And I wanted to ask, how is Liminal taking a step ahead and following global regulations and providing custody to its clients in a safe and compliant manner?
Yes, so everyone, here comes the sales pitch. So, practically speaking, uh, what we have been doing at Liminal is something we all talked about here. So, if you see, Liminal currently follows major regulatory compliances which are either regulated in some jurisdiction or are not regulated in some jurisdictions. But ultimately, when a regulator thinks that how will you regulate a custody service provider, these are the few things which will come into place. So we have taken key things from various regulations across globe. So for example, from a FATF perspective, we thoroughly follow AML and KYC. And while we are a B2B business, this identification of businesses go very deep. So as we speak, Liminal is currently licensed in Abu Dhabi. It has a in principle approval from the regulator there. We have a TCSP license in Hong Kong. So from a organization's perspective, we believe in licensing and registration. And as Adam said, one of the core principles Liminal believes in is security. So the highest level of certification, which is CCSS out there for any crypto company, is CCSS level certification. We have CCSS level 3 certification, which I think only 2 companies in the world have, which in itself uh, is a celebration for us because we have hardware security modules which are used by best of the banks. We encrypt private keys which are managed by hardware wallets to compromise any kind of attacks. So these are the few nicks and tricks we do here, but following the regulations. As I have seen as a lawyer in various jurisdictions, now it is a demand by the regulator that most of the assets of users or clients should be in cold storage. So, as a service to our clients, most of our clients go for wallets wherein the cold storage facility is available. So the majority of the crypto clients are stored in offline manner and they are kept in secure physical location which has a restricted access. So these are the few things. The one last two key independent things which I want to mention, which we do, is we have insured the client's funds. We have taken the insurance over the client's funds. So that policy cover instances of hacking, your employee malfeasance, or any unexpected events. And though not this is not a mandated requirement for us, we do independent audits. So we have a third-party cybersecurity firm who regularly audits us, uh, tells us about our vulnerability assessments, and we do internal audit as well. And these internal audits go deep, and we listen to the problems of what our auditors are saying and what our users are saying. Lastly, we do amazing webinars with amazing people like this. We do industry advocacy. So Liminal actively participate with the industry in conferences, in forums, and place webinars like this, so that people share insights, adopt best practices, and collectively improve the security and compliance standards of the industry, not only from a custody perspective, but also from a perspective where the industry is growing. So, knowing from everyone's experience is something which makes us better. So, I think these are the key things every organization should follow, and uh, that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Thanks, Anat. So we made it through all of our set questions. We had a great comment from one of our audience members, Roshi Sharma. So if somebody in the team can put that up on the screen for everybody to see. And while we're doing that, I know some of the guys on the panel are still keen to kind of touch on the banking question. We have a couple more minutes. So I'm going to call this our closing comments, but at the same time, I have a feeling this is going to be more of a conversation than closing comments. But let me throw this out there for closing comments from each of our panel and just see where it leads. So Joanna, let's start with you, if you don't mind. Any closing comments or any topics you want to add more to?
Thank you, Adam. And it's been great being a part of this panel. I enjoyed everyone's insights and the discussion. Briefly, and I will summarize. I think we're coming out of a year of deep bloodbath and carnage in crypto. Well, a year and a half. And I'm already starting to see the light. So for those of us who have persisted within these very problematic parameters, congratulations. And like I said, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And this is also reflected in the way the industry is going. Like I said, there was heavy investment in infrastructure. Now we're moving towards more user-facing interfaces and application, and that indicates that the industry has reached a level of maturity that will, of course, bring with it increased regulatory and supervisory elements, but also we have everything in place to onboard people in a safer way than we did potentially 2 years ago, even though, like I mentioned, there was that frenzy around the metaverse and Web3 and direct ownership of the internet, etc. But now everything is aligned. I think all the elements are aligned to move on to the next phase, and I am optimistic about the future. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this industry.
Yeah, I think we're all optimistic. Otherwise, we certainly wouldn't be here, that's for sure. And Kunal, how about onto yourself?
Man, first of all, thanks you guys, Liminal, for having me. This was great talking with the fellow panelists, listening to their comments. Overall, like I began with, I've been a part of this space since almost 2014. I was probably one of the early adopters in this space. Believed in it since then. Have worked in various different places. I'm a strong believer, and I think crypto is here to stay. And again, the whole UK aspect of everything, there is a lot of work left, but I think it can be achieved within as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Emmanuel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, again, I think that, maybe I'll start, with one of the follow-up questions that we had. I think that, on the question of banking, and you do still take me to my closest statement, it's basically, one doesn't get fined for servicing a legal industry. One gets fined for not complying with the money laundering regulations, for not doing a risk assessment, for not doing appropriate customer risk assessments, for not doing enhanced due diligence when needed. But if you follow those steps, it's absolutely possible for a bank to follow the rules and to service an industry that is increasingly legal, that is legal in most countries, and that is increasingly regulated. Basically, we cannot keep, or the financial services industry cannot keep painting all of crypto with that same brush that dates from 2013. And that is a preconception that is so hard to shake, because you have many players that are welcoming regulation, and from what I see, advising clients that are crypto native, they have made a lot of efforts to comply with the regulations, and sometimes they have compliance programs that are at the level of what you see in traditional finance. So I think that it's possible for banks to just say, recognize that the industry is entering this phase where it's increasingly regulated, it's getting there, and basically adopt the way that they do the risk assessments about the industry to say, okay, good, I can identify the entities that are doing things right, from the ones that are not. And doing that gives them a commercial advantage, because we're talking about 16, 18% of the population that has crypto, and that's only going up. So, so there's also that opportunity to catch up on, and it can be perfectly done within the current frameworks, and banks can do it.
Awesome. Thank you, Manuel. And Brian, over to you, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would just follow up on what Manuel said. Is at Luca, we are developing risk management tools through the use of blockchain data, and we're combining on and off chain data that is providing banking services, fund administrators, crypto exchanges, anyone that has crypto asset on their books, the tools necessary to be able to address all the issues that, from a tax and accounting perspective and data perspective, that banks have, that regulators have. And so I think, going to all the points previously made, like we're not the only ones, but there's so much infrastructure being built over the past couple of years, that is now being implemented and recognized by government entities and by banks and other more traditional financial structures, that it's just going to take a little bit of time to get there. But we are getting there. There have been solid movements, I would say, over the last 6 to 8 months, 12 months, since like FTX kind of exploded, that regulators understanding this much more. My conversations now with regulators globally is far more advanced than what it was in years past. So I think those are positive developments. It's going to take time. I think ultimately, I still hold out. We're going to hit that Chat GPT moment where a crypto goes from like just being on the periphery to being mainstream, and it's just going to take that one thing to really take it off. I mean, AI 5 months ago was never part of the everyday use. Now people use it for everything. So I think crypto and blockchain is going to get there, and it's going to be built on the infrastructure of companies like mine and other ones here that are providing good services.
Awesome. That's a really nice comparison with the AI moment. I have my fingers crossed that comes sooner rather than later. And now our final panelist, let's hear your final thoughts.
So I'll just wrap this up with few final comments. So the future of crypto assets, especially in the UK, will depend on how the government and the crypto industry work together to address the risk and potential benefits. If the government can create a regulatory framework that allows industry to innovate, it's a win-win situation. If the government fails to address the risk of crypto assets, then the industry may be stifled and the potential benefits of crypto assets may not be realized. But what I want to give you from this webinar is a thought to ponder upon. That I urge you to think about the future of crypto assets, to consider how you can help to shape the future, right? So if you can sit down with bankers and explain them, then we are not here to take your jobs, right? We are here to fill in the deficiencies, or we are here to provide a better service. And how we can basically shape the entire industry in a manner that uh, it becomes a global independent phenomena in itself. So that is the ultimate goal. I think we all should work together. Thank you.
Awesome. So that brings us to the end where
Adam, sorry, as the only woman on the panel, I reserve the right to have the last word. And I want to jump in very briefly on the banking question as well. Let's dispel some myths here. Banks, so a fine from a regulator is not a deterrent for any bank. If we look at recent history, even though not as publicly as in crypto, we would know that. I think the right incentive mechanics have not yet been perfectly aligned for banks to get more involved into crypto, either as servicing clients or more on the investment level. I believe that the next phase in the evolution of crypto is going to be built on a perfect symbiosis between CeFi, DeFi, and TradFi. And when that happens, we're now testing these things, right? When that happens, you will see a complete shift in the attitude of banks when it comes to crypto entities. And trust me, if they were afraid of regulators fining them, which they do get fined almost on a weekly basis with huge amounts, banks would not exist. So I don't think it's that. Like I said, it's the monetary incentive that is not there fully accomplished yet. Thank you, Adam, for allowing me to close the show.
as always, be my guest anytime. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists. What a strong panel, and thank you so much for bringing your expertise and supporting the session. And an extra thank you for Joanna for bringing some green into our offices on this afternoon.
Yes.
So, an additional pleasure there. So everybody, thank you for joining, and I hope you guys found this session useful. If anybody wants to follow up any questions, please send them in, and we'll send them to our panelists and get them back to you somehow. But yeah, I hope you found it useful, and I'm sure we'll be running more sessions in the future. So please keep your eyes peeled and feel free to join us again. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.